this anime series completely blind, it was one of the best decisions that I have ever made, because I had no idea that this week's episode was going to be this over the top. I mean, for fuck's sake, there was a World War II fighter pilot in an airplane fighting against dragons. This week's episode of Drifters was freaking awesome. It was essentially just a giant 20-minute action scene featuring a lot of historical figures drawing a lot of blood. This week's episode immediately picks up from the end of last week's episode when the Ends and the Black King have finally arrived to challenge the Drifters, the Octoberist organization, in this massive army. And this huge battle just ends up ensuing. But the best thing about this episode is being formally introduced to the Ends themselves. Their leader, who is known as the Black King, is this dude who's wearing this hood. He's completely enigmatic, but I'm sure there's already going to be a lot of theories as to who this guy is. He's almost certainly another very famous historical figure, but he has his own personal army of soldiers known as the Ends, and they indeed are based on historical figures. They all have a lot of crazy powers, even more so than the Drifters themselves. They're almost like borderline supernatural. Some of the ones that stick out in my mind is this one guy by the name of Hijikata, who can actually summon these ghosts to attack people. Like, they basically take the form of Japanese soldiers, and he can control them at will. There's also Joan of Arc, yes, the heroine from the 100 Years' War between France and England. And unlike some of the other depictions of her that we've actually seen, she's batshit crazy in this show, and she has the ability to conjure fire. Appropriately, she is also joined by Gilles de Rais, a character who is just plain disturbing in his backstory. Just look it up. It's a lot of brutality and sodomy. But in here, he's kind of like this big hulking figure with this massive lance weapon, which he can use to just swing once and basically just cut anyone in half who gets in his way. There's also Anastasia herself, who seems to have the power of ice. Basically, she's kind of like the exact antithesis to Joan of Arc in many ways, not only in powers, but also in personality. There's also a few other characters who appear, but only so briefly, and just to go along with them, we also have some brand new Drifters as well. My two favorite already are definitely Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. These guys are so awesome. They're gunslingers in the middle of this fantasy world with all of these other historical characters. It's insane, and watching them actually fight against this massive army of monsters, creatures, pigs, dragons, it's just insane and such an assault on your senses. That and the fact that it's just so heavily stylized, incredibly violent, and it gets even crazier when suddenly a brand new Drifter appears in the middle of the battle. While this massive Lord of the Rings-esque battle is going on, this door suddenly appears in the sky, and this giant frickin' World War II Japanese plane just flies into the battlefield. The pilot goes by the name of Naoshi Kano, and I have a feeling he's probably going to be on the Drifters' side, because I've noticed that the Drifters seem to have somewhat natural, normal powers. They can utilize their weapons and their skills, and the Ends tend to use these really over-the-top, supernatural-esque powers, and they can conjure elements and the such. But this guy just flies in with his airplane, starts getting these weird, freaky flashback visions of when the US was actually bombing Tokyo, and that causes him to go insane and start attacking all of these dragons around him. And I swear to God, this guy must have taken his crazy pills, because he just looks insane throughout this entire episode. But that World War II imagery, combined with the fantasy elements and all of the different cultures coming together, has just turned this into a hodgepodge battle of freaking epicness. This was a great introduction to the Ends, how insane they are. It's also raising the stakes to see what this big battle is going to be like when the Drifters go up against them. At first, I was slightly disappointed because I thought that Toyohisa and his group were not going to be appearing in this episode, but make sure to stay tuned at the very end, because there is a post-credit scene where they actually discover the character of Semu, who's been sort of doing reconnaissance for the Octoberist organization, and they completely freak her out and have a little bit of a Hellsing ultimate goofy moment, if you know what I mean. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Drifters? There is no way I'm going to be able to do this episode justice, especially for just how freaking insane it really was at the end of the day. The fact that they can take fantasy elements, mix it with historical stuff from a lot of different time periods, and make it work is a really big accomplishment, because a lot of these things, frankly, just don't mix. They're like lamb and tuna fish. Somehow, it all ends up working like spaghetti and meatballs. Meatballs filled with blood, guts, fire, and ice. This episode just flew by too, mostly because all of the action was just so breakneck from beginning to end. The scene at the end when the October Skies and some of the drifters are trying to escape with the help of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was fantastic. I love that we're going to have characters who can use supernatural abilities, those who can use blunt weapons and swords, and those who can actually use guns. Not to mention World War II battle planes. That was the scene that sold my love of that series. When I saw that dude just flying in, I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? I don't know how it works. I don't know why this entire war is even going on, but I cannot wait to see the rest of it, if only for how ridiculous and over the top it is. And I can't wait to learn why this whole Drifters Ends war is even going on and why it has to be involved in this fantasy world. There's still so many questions and so much mystery behind all of this, and I'm really loving to see it unfold. It also helps that the show just has a lot of freaking style. I mean, it's from the creator of Hellsing, so all of the characters are just so distinctive and over the top and have some of the craziest expressions that you've ever seen. The voice actors are also just fantastic. The animation sequences are fast, fluid, explosive, and incredibly in-your-face about how violent they can be. Bodies exploding, decapitations, dragons roasting people en masse. This was just a brutal episode of Drifters, introducing a fantastic set of villains, which are certainly going to be the perfect adversaries for the Drifters themselves. Really, guys, just watch this episode. It's just freaking nuts. Now, I don't think it was a perfect episode of Drifters. For me, honestly, it was a little excessive at times. And I have to admit, even though I do like the comedy moments, when they show them in a more exaggerated way, it kind of takes me out of the experience a little bit. But then again, they did it in Hellsing, they're going to do it here. So I'm going to give this week's episode of Drifters a 4 out of 5. A pretty damn solid episode of the series, which certainly demands your attention. So you heard my thoughts about this week's episode of Drifters. I want to hear from you guys. Before you leave, make sure to tell me what you thought about this week's episode. Did you have a favorite drifter who appeared in this episode? Who is your favorite member of the Ends? What did you think of that World War II fighter plane just flying in and starting to fight against dragons? And what do you hope to see from the rest of the Drifters anime series? Please tell me in the comments section below. Thank you guys very much for watching this video. I truly appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe so that way you can see all of our latest videos as they are released. You can also leave me a like on this video if you did like this review, and I will see you guys next time. And as always, stay dandy, baby.